What is the mood at this event, right? Is there more focus on the opportunities that this global energy transition potentially, brings about? Or I guess potentially there's also some of the concerns about the risks that are being thrown up as well?
Yeah, well, we're just getting underway here in Perth at the Australian Energy Producers 2024 Conference and Exhibition. This is one of the largest business conferences in Australia. We're expecting well over 2,000 delegates through the doors over the next 3 days. And really, it's a fantastic opportunity for the industry to come together to share the latest innovations and technologies, but also to discuss those issues that are really important for the industry, for our role in terms of the transition and our role in the region in terms of being a reliable supplier of LNG to Asia.
So in terms of the current policy settings for Australia, do you think that's sufficient to encourage new levels of investment?
Well, there's no doubt that we've seen a number of reforms and changes in the policy and regulatory environment here in Australia in the last 12 to 18 months. But just a week or so ago, we had the federal government release a future gas strategy that was unambiguous in terms of the long-term critical role that natural gas will play in the energy mix to 2050 and beyond. That includes here in Australia, but also in terms of the role of LNG in the region. So we really very much welcome that sort of reset of the policy environment. We're now looking as an industry to work with the government to ensure that we can get the investment that we need to bring on new supply for the domestic market, but also for our international customers.
Yeah, and speaking of those international customers, Samantha, we've heard concerns from the likes of Japan, South Korea, big buyers of Australia's LNG, concerned that their contracts won't be honoured. So do you think these policy changes are enough to sort of alleviate those fears?
Well, we share some of the concerns of our regional trading partners. It's imperative that those LNG export contracts are honoured. The industry is working hard to ensure that we remain a reliable, stable supplier of LNG. We know how important our LNG is to keeping the lights on in Tokyo, to fueling manufacturing in South Korea, and it's key that we have the stability now in the policy settings to bring on those new investments that are needed and to reset that relationship with the major investors.
And then you've got projects, of course, from the likes of Qatar, the US. They're going to be able to deliver LNG at a lower cost. So is Australia going to be able to stay competitive on an international scale as well?
Well, there's no question that we're heading into an era of intense competition in LNG markets. You can see that the US, Qatar are really doubling down on their investments in LNG. It does reflect, though, the important role that LNG is going to play in terms of the transition, particularly in the region. And for Southeast Asia, the International Energy Agency is projecting as much as a tenfold increase in LNG demand. Australia is really well positioned to be able to supply that LNG to the region to support not just energy security in these economies, but the transition away from coal and towards net zero.
What are your views on Australia's potential role for carbon capture, particularly serving the rest of industrialised Asia?
Certainly the future gas strategy that was released by the federal government just a week or so ago did indicate a very important role and opportunity for Australia to provide that CO2 storage service to the region. We're very conscious that CCS is a critical technology to decarbonise our industrial sector. That's here in Australia, but also in countries like Japan. And we are blessed with abundant CO2 storage resources. So we're already progressing opportunities to be able to take that CO2 from countries like Japan and Korea and store it safely and permanently here in Australia. And that's part of our contribution to a global net zero target.
Samantha, just last question on gas prices generally, because they've dropped from the record highs that we saw going back to 2022, but they're still well above the levels we've seen over the past decade or so. So do those sorts of high prices risk demand destruction across the emerging markets?
Well, certainly we've seen a period of high prices following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This was a global energy crisis. We had unprecedented pressures on LNG market. Those pressures have come off substantially still, but there is strong growing demand for LNG, and that's why here in Australia we feel it's really important that we get the investment settings right so we can contribute to the supply that will be needed to meet that demand and keep LNG affordable, reliable, because we know what happens when that gas supply is not there, that countries are shifting back to coal and higher emission fuels. So it's not good for economies, it's not good for jobs, and it's certainly not good for the environment.